A solution to the problem: the universal as a state of affairs. While I do not wish to endorse the whole of his philosophy, it seems to me that the 12th century scholastic Peter Abelard opened the way to the correct answers to this paradox by asking himself the right questions. Having dismissed Plato's vulgar idealism, he asked himself the following three questions. 1. What is the common cause in accordance with which a common name is imposed? 2. What is the understanding's common conception of the likeness of things? 3. Is a word called common on account of the common cause things agree in, or on account of the common conception, or on both together? After considering the points we have addressed above, Abelard makes his first important point. If there is a common cause in beings, whereby we classify them as being in some sense the same, it cannot be a common thing or being, since that assumption causes contradictions that have already been addressed. If it cannot be a common thing, then neither can it be a multitude of things. But if it's a common cause, it can't be nothing either. Let me quote the Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy at length on this point. Therefore, this common cause, which Abelard calls the status of those things to which it is common, is a cause, but it is a cause which is a non-thing. However strange this may sound, Abelard observes that sometimes we do assign causes which are not things. For example, when we say, quote, the ship was wrecked because the pilot was absent, end quote. The cause that we assign, namely that the pilot was absent, is not some thing. It is rather how things were, i.e., the way things were, in which in this case we signify by the whole proposition the pilot was absent, end quote. Right. In other words, it's not the entities, beings, or things themselves that are common to several beings, such that we can predicate a universal quality to them, but rather the state of affairs or relationship among particulars within and among several beings is what allows us to predicate a universal to them. Whenever a way of being can be predicated univocally to several beings, there is among them a universal relationship. For example, when I say that Sarah and John are both human beings, I am not saying that Sarah and John are both shadowy copies of the great everyman, Plato, nor that they are distinct particulars who both instantiate a form of humanness, Aristotle. But I am also saying a great deal more than that they are two utterly distinct beings who happen to resemble each other, resemblance nominalism, or that I have a fictitious concept of humanness in my mind under which Sarah and John just happen to fall conveniently, which is conceptualism. Rather, I am asserting that Sarah and John both satisfy in their particular and individuated natures some criteria or quality of being, so that whatever other differences they may have, they are identical at least in this respect. And this quality that they agree in is not just something I've made up for convenience, but rather something that each enjoys in his or her being, albeit in a distinct way. But humanity is not a being or entity, although the existence of the state of affairs called being human is dependent upon the existence of real individual beings. In the same way, if I say that a rhinoceros and a wasp both have a life, I am saying something true about the actual state of affairs that adheres in both creatures, but does not adhere in a rock. Likewise, this triangle and that triangle agree at least in this respect, in having three sides. It is not necessary that they enjoy some common being, or that there be some every triangle. A universal is a state of affairs that adheres in several particulars. It is not a common being or a common act of being. Now, having addressed the ontological questions of how there can be universals, I will address the epistemological question. What is the status of our knowledge about universals? Well, let us first recall that the status or state of affairs is present in things, whether or not our mind realizes it. So it is an objective quality of the being in question that they possess within their own construction. But what is the relationship between universals and our mind's knowledge of them? Well, as far as Abelard is concerned, there are basically two kinds of mental relations between our minds and universals. First, we abstract from particular states of affairs to form concepts about them. The basic question to be asked about these concepts is, how true are they? How true are the concepts to the actual states of affairs? What is the relationship of truth or resemblance between the concept that I form about a thing and the thing itself? The truest possible concept is what Abelard calls the universal concept, being an abstraction about states of affairs which exactly matches the state of affairs that inheres in things. An incorrect conception of the state of affairs, for example, grouping things together that don't really go together in the sense intended, or making a statement about a particular that isn't true, would be the fictitious object of the mind. That is, it's an abstraction that doesn't really describe the state of affairs in question. So the universal concept is the idea of the world or of reality as it actually is with respect to certain features or qualities among individuals, while the fictitious object is an improperly formed idea of states of affairs that doesn't really describe beings or state of affairs as they actually are. In my opinion, we are all caught between the tension of fictitious objects, which we naturally fall into without concerted effort, and the universal concept, which is the absolute truth about reality and its relations. But it's also very difficult to arrive at, and arguably we never quite get there. For Abelard, we can, with the efforts of reason, arrive at universal concepts whose referent is, again, not in some realm of forms, but in the state of affairs that exist in particulars themselves. The concepts and language we develop to this end are true and useful to the extent that they accurately reflect reality as it actually is. But notice that Abelard's conception does imply that the language and concepts we develop for understanding reality can color our perception of reality. In sum, I think Abelard's approach is correct in that it satisfies the prerogatives of both common sense and logic. It does justice to our sense of what we know and how we know it. It does not brush either particulars or universals under the ontological table. A final point before I go. Did you notice the resemblance between the tension in Plato between sensible reality and ultimate reality, and the tension in Abelard between the fictitious object and the universal concept? Perhaps we have more to talk about concerning the quest for truth in a world that sometimes feels like a hall of mirrors. But how strange to start out this way with Plato and end this way with Abelard, two thinkers whose understanding, although very different in starting premises and conclusions, imply a similar lesson about the quest for reason. How bizarre.